Hello, my favorite subscribers. Today we have another exciting and interesting revenge story. Enjoy the show! False Witness. Chapter 1: The Verdict. Mia Wallace had always believed in the system, that truth prevailed, justice was blind, and the scales were balanced. But as she stood, rigid and resolute, in the center of the courtroom, she felt the weight of a million eyes upon her, the air thick with anticipation. The courtroom was a maelstrom of murmurs and movement, but at the heart of it all was Mia, a pillar of stillness amidst the chaos. The case against her was circumstantial at best, a house of cards built on the sandy foundation of unreliable testimonies and manipulated evidence. But the prosecutor, Gregory Haynes, was a master of persuasion, painting Mia as a villain with strokes of deceit and half-truths. He had spun a narrative so compelling that it seemed even the truth could not compete with his fiction. Mia's lawyer, an overworked public defender, had fought valiantly against the tide, but it was like patching a leaking ship with nothing but hope and bare hands. Mia's innocence, her spotless record, her compliance, none bore weight against the twisted testimony of a witness who claimed to have seen her at the scene of the crime, a witness who Mia knew was lying. When the jury filed back into the room after hours of deliberation, Mia searched their faces for a sign, a hint of exoneration. But their expressions were inscrutable, their eyes averted. The foreman handed a piece of paper to the judge, and a leaden silence filled the room. The judge's voice was the crack of doom as he read the verdict. On the count of second-degree murder, we find the defendant, Mia Wallace, guilty. The word guilty ricocheted off the walls of the courtroom and settled like a shroud over Mia. There were gasps, cries from her family, the celebratory rustling of papers from the prosecutor's desk. But above all, there was the sound of the gavel, punctuating her fate with 3 sharp cracks. As the bailiffs led her away, her mother's sobs were the last human sounds that reached her. Mia's world narrowed to the cold grip on her arms and the clank of her shackles. Her life as she knew it was over, the future a bleak landscape of steel bars and shadowed corners. But even as the cell door closed with a resounding clang, sealing her fate, a fire ignited within her. If the law could be manipulated to serve injustice, then she would learn it, master it, and wield it. She would become the hammer instead of the anvil. That night, in the darkness of her cell, Mia made a vow. She would not let this be her end. She would study, fight, and return to this world armed with the power of the law. She would clear her name, and then she would dismantle the corrupt system that had ensnared her. For now, Mia Wallace was a prisoner. But she would not remain so. One day, the world would know her as something else entirely, not as a false witness, but as a harbinger of truth. Chapter 2: The Education. The stark walls of the cell did little to confine Mia's burgeoning thirst for knowledge. Days turned into weeks, and weeks bled into months, each passing moment a testament to her unyielding resolve. The prison library, with its musty smell and worn-out books, became her sanctuary, her law school, her battleground. She started with the basics, poring over legal textbooks with a voracious hunger. Each statute and precedent she memorized was a brick in the fortress she was building around herself. Mia's cellmate, an older woman named Evelyn, soon took notice of the fire that burned in Mia's eyes. Evelyn, with a past shrouded in mystery and a mind sharp as a tack, became an unlikely mentor, pushing Mia to think critically and challenging her to mock debates. "You're building a weapon, Mia," Evelyn would say, her voice as rough as the prison walls, "and knowledge is your blade. Sharpen it." Mia took the words to heart, dedicating every waking hour to her studies. She corresponded with legal advocates, bartered for materials with other inmates, and wrote appeals that brought light to overlooked cases like her own. The law was intricate and unforgiving, but to Mia, it was a puzzle she was determined to solve. Her efforts did not go unnoticed. Word of her legal acumen spread through the prison like wildfire, igniting hope in the hearts of many who had resigned themselves to despair. Inmates began to seek Mia's counsel, and she worked tirelessly, crafting appeals and motions for them, becoming an unofficial advocate for the voiceless. Then, 2 years into her sentence, an envelope arrived that changed everything. It was from a non-profit legal organization that specialized in wrongful convictions. They had been reviewing her case, intrigued by the meticulous appeals she had penned from her cell. The letter was an offer of representation, a beacon of hope in the relentless darkness. With seasoned lawyers now at her side, Mia's case was reopened. They unearthed evidence that had been suppressed, witnesses who had been coerced, and discrepancies in the prosecution's narrative that could no longer be ignored. The fight was arduous, with each courtroom battle fiercely contested by a prosecution that refused to admit wrongdoing. But the truth, as it always does, found a way to seep through the cracks of the facade that had been so artfully crafted by Gregory Haynes. And when the day came for Mia's hearing, the air was electric with the charge of impending freedom. The courtroom was packed, a stark contrast to the sparse attendance at her original trial. Supporters, journalists, and curious onlookers filled every seat, a sea of faces watching as the judge presided over what would be one of the most defining moments of Mia's life. The gavel fell, and the judge cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the tension. In light of new evidence and the egregious breaches of legal conduct, this court has no choice but to overturn the conviction of Mia Wallace. The courtroom erupted, a cacophony of cheers and applause as Mia, for the first time in years, felt the weight of the chains fall away. She was exonerated, free, but as she stepped out of the courtroom and into the sunlight, she knew this was not her victory alone. It was a victory for every soul she had fought for within the prison walls, for the justice system she had once believed in and would now contribute to reshaping. Mia Wallace, once a prisoner of fate, had emerged as a student of justice. And her education was just beginning. Chapter 3: The Exoneration. The morning of Mia's release dawned clear and cold, a fresh start painted in broad strokes of sunshine and crisp air. The gates of the institution that had been her reluctant home groaned open, and she stepped through them, not as a convict, but as a symbol of perseverance and hope. The media swarmed like locusts, hungry for the story of the woman who had overturned her own conviction from a prison library. Mia's mother, aged prematurely by grief and now unburdened by it, enveloped her in an embrace that seemed to reverse the years of separation. "You're home," her mother whispered, a simple declaration full of complexity. But even amidst the reunions and the celebrations, Mia's mind was whirring. Her exoneration was not the end of the road, it was merely a rest stop. She now carried the weight of purpose, and it propelled her forward with an unshakable sense of duty. Her story had become a catalyst, sparking debates on legal forums and amongst the highest echelons of the judicial system. Law schools invited her to speak, news outlets sought her insight, and the once skeptical public now listened intently to what Mia Wallace had to say. Yet, even as her voice carried across podiums and television screens, there was a private battle being waged, a meticulous plan taking shape. Mia's exoneration had been a blow to the credibility of Gregory Haynes, but she knew the man's career was built on a house of cards much like the case he had constructed against her. She vowed to unearth the rot at its foundation, not for vengeance, but for justice. Returning to formal education, Mia enrolled in law school, where she excelled, not only in her studies, but in her innate understanding of the law's nuances. Her experience lent her insights that professors admired and peers respected. She wasn't just learning the law, she was learning how to reform it. While her academic prowess won her accolades, it was her work outside the classroom that built her legacy. Mia began working with the Innocence Project, digging into cases that bore the hallmarks of the same injustice she had suffered. Her approach was methodical, her analysis incisive, and soon she was not just assisting in these cases, she was leading them. With each case reopened, each conviction questioned, the whispers about Gregory Haynes grew louder. Mia's presence in the courtroom was a specter that haunted him, a reminder of his fallibility. And when she finally graduated, top of her class, the accolade was not just a personal triumph, but a warning shot across the bow of a system rife with corruption. The day of her graduation, Mia stood before her peers, a robe draped over her shoulders, a testament to her journey. Law is not merely a career, she told them, it's a calling, a weapon for truth, and a shield for the innocent. We must wield it with integrity, for the moment we falter, we risk becoming the very thing we swore to stand against. Mia's oath was more than words, it was a promise to those still behind bars, to the system she was now a part of, and to herself. The chapter of her exoneration had closed, but the book of her legacy was just beginning. And its next chapter promised to be even more formidable. Chapter 4: The Advocate. The corridors of justice had become a second home to Mia, the echo of her heels against marble floors as familiar as the rhythmic clank of chains had once been. But now, these sounds were a herald of change, each step a note in the symphony of transformation she was composing. With her Juris Doctor in hand and a firebrand reputation, Mia was recruited by a prestigious law firm known for its ruthless efficiency and sterling record. However, her decision to join them was strategic. She needed their resources and influence to wage the war she had been planning. She became the face of the firm's pro bono work, taking on cases that were whispers of injustice needing a voice loud enough to echo through the halls of power. It wasn't long before she was known as the Advocate, a title bestowed upon her by the people she fought for, a moniker that was both respect and responsibility. Her clients were not just cases, they were causes, each a thread in the tapestry of a flawed judicial system that she was determined to mend. Gregory Haynes, once a titan of the courtroom, now tread carefully, his every case scrutinized for the faults that Mia had made apparent. The tables had turned, and he found himself often on the defensive, the shadow of past misdeeds a constant follower. Mia, in contrast, thrived in the spotlight, her arguments in court not just persuasive but enlightening, often leaving jurors, judges, and even opponents in contemplative silence. Her approach was not merely to win cases, but to educate, to spread awareness, to reform. And reform she did. Mia's cases became landmarks, cited in law schools and used as precedents in courts. But more than that, they became instruments of policy change. She worked tirelessly with lawmakers, lending her voice and expertise to draft legislation that closed the gaps through which the innocent often fell. Yet, amidst her crusade, Mia never lost sight of her own personal vendetta, the professional and moral dismantling of Gregory Haynes. It was a vendetta not born of hatred but of necessity. His downfall was to be a message that the era of untouchability within the legal profession was over. Her chance came when a whistleblower emerged, one of Haynes's own former assistants, burdened by conscience and armed with evidence of his misconduct. Mia took the lead, not as a prosecutor, but as an ally of the truth. The case was built not on revenge, but on righteousness, and as the trial progressed, the evidence was undeniable. Haynes's facade crumbled under the weight of his own misdeeds. He was disbarred, his legacy tarnished beyond redemption. It was a victory not just for Mia, but for every individual who had suffered under his gavel. Yet, for Mia, there was no joy in his downfall. It was simply an affirmation that the system, when led by the right hands, worked. She didn't relish his defeat, she simply acknowledged it as necessary surgery for the diseased body of law. As the chapter of Mia's advocacy came to a close, with Haynes's career in ruins and her firm's influence at its zenith, she knew her work was far from over. Each case, each law, each day was another step towards a fairer world. She had become more than an advocate, she was a guardian of justice, and her watch had just begun. Chapter 5: The New Dawn. In the quiet aftermath of Gregory Haynes's professional demise, a sense of closure swept through the city's legal circles. The case had been a spectacle, a cathartic purge of a system that had allowed power and corruption to go hand in hand for too long. But for Mia, the end of the trial was not a finale. It was an overture to a broader mission, the dawn of a new chapter in her life's work. She stood in her office, the skyline of the city stretching out before her like a vast, living organism. It was early, the sun casting a golden sheen over the buildings, heralding the birth of a new day. The advocate, as she was now known far and wide, gazed at the horizon, contemplating the journey ahead. Her victories in the courtroom had garnered attention, sparking a movement that rippled across the nation. Calls for reform, which had once been whispers, were now a resounding chorus. And as the architect of this newfound momentum, Mia felt the weight of expectation and the buoyancy of hope. With a steady hand, she drafted the blueprint for a foundation, an organization dedicated not just to overturning wrongful convictions, but to preventing them. The Morrow Initiative, named in honor of her mother, who had never wavered in her belief of Mia's innocence, was born from the idea that justice required proactive guardianship, not just reactive measures. The foundation attracted minds and hearts alike, a collective of lawyers, activists, scholars, and former inmates, all united under Mia's vision. They pushed for technological advancements in forensics, championed the implementation of body cameras for law enforcement, and lobbied for the overhaul of interrogation techniques to prevent false confessions. But Mia's commitment to change went beyond the systemic, it was personal. She began a mentorship program, guiding young women who aspired to law, teaching them that a legal career was not about the pursuit of power, but the pursuit of equity. Her story became a case study, a narrative used to inspire and educate. As the Morrow Initiative grew, so did its impact. Wrongful conviction rates began to drop, and those already ensnared in the system found a new ally in their corner. Mia's work shone as a beacon, illuminating the path for those seeking redemption and for a society striving for justice. The advocate could often be found in the heart of the initiative's headquarters, her office abuzz with the activity of the latest case, the next campaign, the ongoing battle. But there were moments, fleeting and poignant, where she would pause at her window, eyes cast upon the city that had once judged her, that now hailed her as a champion. In these moments of reflection, Mia understood that her journey was not just one of personal vengeance or redemption. It was a journey of transformation, for herself and for the world she influenced. Her legacy was no longer defined by the lies that had once threatened to end her, but by the truth she now wielded with unassailable might. As the day's light waned, giving way to the soft glow of dusk, Mia knew that the road ahead was long and fraught with challenges. But as she turned from the window, back to the work that awaited her, she carried with her the unwavering certainty that every step taken was a step towards a brighter, fairer future. The story of Catherine Morrow, the advocate, was not one of mere retribution. It was a saga of resilience, a testament to the enduring human spirit, and a narrative of a new dawn for justice. And as the chapter came to a close, the world watched, knowing that the next would be written not by one woman alone, but by the many lives she had touched, the many battles she had fought, and the many victories she had yet to achieve.